My name is Leslie, and sometimes it feels like my whole life is a never-ending marathon between a desperate desire for independence and a quiet, sticky guilt that won't go away when I hear my mother's voice. I work at a large tech company downtown, and I've truly achieved a lot, not instantly and not without scars, but with my own hands, without gifts or favors. Senior Director of Operations, a six-figure salary, an apartment overlooking the river, and morning coffee on the balcony where, for the first time in years, I felt like I was living the life I once dreamed of, and yet, as soon as the word mom flashes on my phone screen, this fragile sense of adult independence crumbles like a house of cards. She doesn't call often, which in itself is a warning sign. Usually it means the roof is leaking again, the washing machine is broken, or I'm out of money for medication. Leslie, honey, can you come over tonight? We really need to talk, she said, and I immediately heard that special, strained tone in her voice, where concern mingled with a plea. It's been in my blood for 5 years now, ever since I started earning decent money. Of course, I asked, what's going on, Mom? But all I heard was the usual, just come over after work, your dad and I need to discuss something important, and everything became clear. My brain, as usual, started calculating, how much is this time, 1,000, too? Or maybe another temporary loan that is never repaid? I love my parents, I really do. Dad worked in construction his whole life until 3 years ago, when he came down with back problems. After 40 years of hard labor, he can barely lift a box of groceries now. Mom has been working part-time at a grocery store for ages now, quiet, tired, with constant pain in her legs. They're not bad people, they've just been worn down by life, and the only pressure relief is me. Their eldest daughter with a good job and an unlimited credit card. I sometimes call myself their survival machine, put in a request, get paid. And then there's Emma, my younger sister, 22, graduates from college next month. We're like two different banks of the same river. We see each other, but never cross paths. By the time she was in high school, I'd already left home, living on campus, working nights at a cafe to pay for my studies. Then came my first job, my first promotion, the endless pursuit of success. Emma grew up on framed photos and the occasional call on holidays. Maybe that's why she doesn't love me. Yes, that's right. She's not just jealous, she genuinely can't stand me. I tried to build a relationship with her, went to school plays, wrote to her when she got into college, but all I got in response was eye rolls and icy yeah. My parents said it was just me, that it would pass, but it never did. Sometimes I think the very idea of my adulthood irritates her, that I seem to have made it, while she's still searching for who to become. After work, I drove to my parents' house as if I were heading not home but to the collections department, already mentally calculating how much tonight would cost. Their house is in an old neighborhood where everyone once knew each other by name, but now only the paint peels off the fences and the asphalt cracks underfoot. As I pulled into their driveway, my father's old Honda let out a plaintive, almost human groan, as if it, too, was tired of being asked. I knocked on the door and entered. Without waiting, as usual, the house smelled of fried onions and medicine. Mom sat at the kitchen table, holding a mug in both hands, Dad next to her, his face tense, as if he were studying for an exam. Sit down, honey, Mom said, patting the chair next to me. I sat down, and that oppressive silence that only begets requests hung in the air. Dad cleared his throat. Leslie, you know we wouldn't ask if it weren't really bad, he began, not looking me in the eye. The car completely stalled yesterday, Mom added, folding her hands on the table. The mechanic said there's no point in fixing it, the transmission's dead, the repairs will cost more than the car itself. She spoke calmly, but her fingers trembled. I looked at them both and felt the familiar mixture of pity and irritation growing inside me. I wanted to hug them, and at the same time scream that I couldn't be everyone's lifeline all the time, but I knew that everything would happen the same way as always. I would sigh, ask how much is needed, transfer the money and go home, feeling in my chest that same familiar heavy echo, not of resentment or anger, but of fatigue from the fact that love in our family is always measured by the amount of the transfer. I looked out the window, and sure enough, there was their old Honda, tired, dented, as if life itself had driven over it several times. The rust on the doors looked like scars, and the rear bumper was held together by a thread and 2 zip ties. We can't afford a new car, my father said quietly, not looking at me, and I already knew the familiar arithmetic of pain would follow, but we need it, you know, Leslie? Your mom has to go to work, I have to go to the doctor, and the buses only run once an hour now." They both looked at me, hopefully, pleadingly, with that strange expression I'd seen hundreds of times, as if not just their comfort but their very dignity depended on me. I felt my shoulders grow heavy again, as if someone had hung an invisible stone on them with the engraving "Only Successful Daughter." "How much are we talking about?" I asked, trying to keep my voice calm, even though the fatigue was already rising inside me, warm and thick as molasses. "Not much," my mother said quickly, "just something reliable, used, for 10 or 15 grand. She said it with the naive ease with which people talk about buying a carton of milk, as if $10,000 or $15,000 weren't the result of years of sleepless nights, overtime, and coffee consumed alone under the cold light of my computer screen. But I nodded silently. I knew I'd agree anyway, because no matter how much irritation festered, these two were still my parents, and I couldn't just let them sit cooped up without a car or a way to see a doctor. "Okay," I finally exhaled, and instantly their faces transformed. Mom nearly burst into tears, Dad squeezed my hand, and in that moment I realized that for them, this wasn't just a purchase, but a symbol, that I was still there, that I hadn't forgotten who I was and where I came from. A couple of days later, the three of us were standing in the parking lot of Johnson's Auto Sales, which smelled of hot metal, rubber, and the desperation of people trying too hard to look confident. My parents acted like kids in a candy store, their eyes sparkled, their hands reaching for every car, and I stood behind them, trying to maintain the polite expression of a grown woman paying for other people's whims. "Oh, Leslie, look at her." Mom practically jumped up, running up to the shiny blue sedan, sparkling in the sun like a Christmas ornament. "Isn't she wonderful? So beautiful." My father was already discussing some technical details with the salesman, pretending he was about to enter a race. I walked closer and almost choked on the rest of my coffee. The price tag read $28,000. "Mom, that's twice what we discussed," I said, trying to speak calmly, but my voice betrayed me by a tremor. Mom folded her hands, as if about to pray, and looked at me with gentle reproach. "But, honey, look how beautiful it is. And safe. You want us to be safe, right?" This safety had always been her argument, universal, invincible, the one that makes any child, even an adult, stop arguing. And then he intervened, the salesman named Rick, with perfectly coiffed hair and a smile so strained it seemed his face would crack. "This model is one of the most reliable in its class," he said in the voice of a competent psychologist, accustomed to selling not cars, but the feeling of the right choice. "Your parents deserve better, they will be able to count on her for many years." I wanted to roll my eyes, but I just clenched my jaw. This guy didn't even know us, but he was already talking like he'd read our life script. "We were thinking 15 grand, no more," I replied evenly. Rick instantly gave a sympathetic smile and led us to the far end of the parking lot, where the cars sat in rows, covered in dust, with dents and dimmed headlights, like veterans who'd been through too much. "Here, take a look at these," he said, opening the doors of the old sedans. Mom looked at one of them and wrinkled her nose, as if she'd been forced to smell spoiled milk. "Leslie, just look at them, they're so old, beat up, sad. What if they break down in a month? Then what, run back to you?" Dad nodded quietly, adding, "Maybe we should look at something newer, honey, just something that will last a long time." I stood between them and these cars, feeling a tired, almost physical irritation run down my spine. They always start with something reasonable, and then, as if on a well-worn path, slowly but surely move toward the expensive option, and every time, I find myself in the role of the villain, the cold, callous, ungrateful daughter who thinks about money, not her parents. Rick stood nearby, still smiling, as if anticipating the moment of the deal. Mom quietly took my hand, as if asking not just for a car, but for confirmation that I was still their girl, that a chasm of checks and loans hadn't grown between us, and I felt something soft, almost forgotten, tighten inside me again, a mixture of love and helplessness, from which all my concessions are born. We spent more than 3 hours in that dealership, and they were the longest 3 hours of my entire conscious weekend. I stood between the rows of cars, listening to Rick's endless sales pitches like a broken record, watching my parents gradually, step by step, lose touch with reality, falling in love with every shiny new surface, every heated seat, and every built-in rearview camera. Rick, that omnipresent priest of automotive illusions, kept throwing words like reliability, warranty, and status into the air, and I caught myself thinking that if he said your parents deserve better one more time, I really wouldn't be able to stand it and would throw my bag at him. In the end, they settled on a silver Toyota Camry, not just a car, but practically a symbol of their dreams, costing exactly $30,000, $2,000 more than the blue one my mother had so enthusiastically shown me an hour earlier. That's reasonable, Leslie, she said, stroking the hood with her palm as if it were a living thing. Look, it has heated seats. I stared at the car, shining under the overhead lights, thinking it cost more than some families earned in a year, that it was no longer a means of transportation, but a small, carefully polished luxury, purchased at the cost of my peace of mind. But then I looked at their faces. Mom was beaming like a girl who'd won a doll at a fair, and Dad, for the first time in months, was smiling without a hint of pain or fatigue, and everything inside me trembled. The paperwork dragged on interminably. Rick still wouldn't let up. He offered us extended warranties, insurance for everything, some incredibly useful service packages, and I was already counting the minutes until my escape. No, thanks, we'll make do with the basic insurance, I said, but he kept coming back, like a mosquito in my ear, and when Mom finally said they hadn't even thought about insurance, I wasn't surprised. Of course they hadn't. Insurance is probably expensive for a new car. Dad added with an apologetic smile, as if apologizing for having all the stuff dumped on my shoulders again. By the time we finished, I'd spent a little over $32,000, including the security deposit, registration, and other little things that seem insignificant on paper but add up to another chunk of my life, translated into numbers. And yet, when I saw my parents pull out of the parking lot in their new car, both smiling like teenagers after graduation, I felt a strange calm. They'd struggled, survived, and sacrificed for so many years. Maybe they really deserved at least a little pleasure. That evening, they invited me over, saying they wanted to celebrate, just a family dinner, Mom said over the phone, and I agreed, grabbing a bottle of wine. When I walked into the house, it smelled of stew and mashed potatoes, the same kind my mother made that always warmed my heart as a child. Emma was home, back from college for the weekend. She was sitting on the couch, staring at her phone. Looking physically ill to be here among us. Hi, Emma, I said, trying to keep my voice soft. How were classes? Almost done, huh? She looked up for just a second to roll her eyes, then looked back at the screen. Everything's fine, great. I gritted my teeth. After spending $30,000 on our parents' car, a little common courtesy didn't seem like much to ask, but I remained silent. Mom bustled about the stove, humming, Dad opening cans of beer. The evening could have been warm, even happy. We sat down at the table, the same kitchen table where just a few days earlier they'd asked me for help, and for the first time in a long time, I felt like maybe things weren't so bad. Let's have a drink, Dad said, raising his beer, to Leslie, for making all of this possible. We're so grateful, dear. Mom raised her glass of wine and repeated, to Leslie. I felt embarrassed. It was a little awkward, but pleasant, because beneath all the fatigue, beneath all the bills and money talk, it finally sounded like an acknowledgement, a real, human one. But then I noticed Emma. She sat with her elbow on the table, her glass still slumped, that sour expression that always made my heart clench. When Mom and Dad turned to her expectantly, she merely shrugged and took a sip of her soda. Emma, aren't you going to thank your sister? Mom asked, her voice still tender but already tinged with concern. Emma shrugged. For what? She didn't buy me anything. The air instantly thickened. I felt my chest tighten, and the room seemed to grow colder. Dad frowned, his voice low and stern. Emma, but she only sighed, shrugging her shoulders in irritation. What? I'm just saying, everyone acts like she's some kind of heroine, but she just wrote a check, she didn't build the car. I felt heat rise in my face, my cheeks flushed, and everything inside me clenched, not from anger, but from pain. Sorry, what? I said, but Emma had already turned away, buried in her phone. Nothing, forget it. And of course, I couldn't forget, because her words struck deeper than I expected, not at the money, but at what I was still trying to hold on to, the feeling that all of this sacrifice, felt like love to someone other than them. She always acted like that, quietly but tartly, as if my every word and every action were a challenge to which she responded with little jabs, not open hostility, but cold mockery. She pretended that everything I did was insignificant, that my efforts were ridiculous, my actions excessive, and any help was just a way to remind her that I was older, more successful, capable of something she couldn't. The rest of dinner passed in excruciating tension, and although Mom and Dad desperately tried to salvage the atmosphere, talking about the weather, the neighbors, the new car, gas deals, it all made no sense because Emma sat across from me, stone-faced, pretending none of it concerned her, and sometimes, at the mention of my name, she rolled her eyes so demonstratively that I just wanted to get up and leave. Every time my parents thanked me for my help or excitedly discussed the new car, she would sigh theatrically, shake her head, and then let out short, caustic remarks, quietly, as if under her breath, but loud enough for me to hear and feel my irritation rising. At some point, I couldn't take it anymore. You know what? I should probably go home, I said, trying to save face, even though inside I was seething. I have to get up early tomorrow. Mom looked alarmed. Oh, don't go yet, we haven't served dessert yet. But I smiled and shook my head. Thanks, Mom, but I'm really tired. And then Emma, without looking up from her phone, said a short, bye, not a thank you for buying your parents a car, not a see you later, not even a basic drive carefully, just a cold, almost lifeless bye, spoken with such indifference that it sounded louder than any insult. I hugged Mom, feeling her hold me tighter than usual, as if apologizing for her daughter for all of this, and without another word, she left. Dad walked me to the door, hugged me awkwardly, his shoulders feeling tired, and I practically ran down to the car, just wanting to be alone sooner. All the way home, I thought about only one thing, how Emma could be so ungrateful. Of course, I knew we'd never been truly close, there'd always been some invisible gulf between us, whether because of the age difference, or because, from childhood, she'd seen me not as a sister, but as someone living in a different reality, where everything was simpler, calmer, more correct. But would even a little humanity have killed her? Even one simple word of gratitude? I wasn't doing this for myself, I just wanted my parents to have at least a little happiness. Oh well, I told myself, trying to regain my inner balance, I'd done a good deed, I'd brought them joy, and that's what matters. Emma can remain angry, resentful, envious, whatever she wants, it's her choice, her burden, not mine. A month passed, and everything, as usual in my family, gradually returned to normal. Mom called a couple of times, first, asking for some money for a plumbing problem, something with the pipes. They'd called a repairman, it said, and it cost only $400. Then she called again, this time it was about Dad's medication. The insurance hadn't covered everything, leaving her $300 short. I wired the money without asking questions, feeling like a walking ATM, but convincing myself it wasn't a big deal. At least they had a car, and they were happy, and I could afford not to count every penny. And then one day, as I was sitting in the kitchen, finishing my cold coffee and going through the bills, my cousin Jessica called. We'd always been closer than many other relatives, the same age, with the same sense of humor. We even joked that the universe was deliberately playing tricks on us, making us show up to family gatherings in similar dresses, 6 times in a row. From then on, we made sure to consult before every celebration. Hey, Les, she said cheerfully, what are you going to wear to Emma's prom? I found a cute black dress, but I wanted to check just in case. I don't want to be your clone again. I almost dropped the phone. What prom? I breathed out. There was a long pause on the other end. Well, Emma's prom, at Riverside Resort. She sent me an invitation a couple of weeks ago. It was really beautiful, with gold embossing. I thought you knew everything by now. I felt a chill run through my stomach, like someone had opened a window onto a frosty night. Jess, wait, what Riverside Resort? I asked, feeling my voice begin to shake. Oh, well, it's a country club, a lovely place where they do weddings and all sorts of parties, very expensive. By the way, everything is organized there in a luxurious way, dinner, music, 2 days of celebration. I thought your parents arranged it all, or did you help her? I froze. Riverside Resort. I'd driven past this place a couple of times, seen the fountains glinting, the cars with tinted windows parked at the entrance, the smiling people with glasses of champagne coming out onto the terrace to take photos against the sunset. This place always seemed like something from another life, foreign, wealthy, where they didn't count money or talk about debt. And now, my 22-year-old sister, still in school, is throwing her graduation there? Jess, Are you sure? I finally said, absolutely, I have an invitation. It even says it's a 2-day event, with accommodations. After we hung up, I sat for another 10 minutes, staring into space, phone in hand, feeling everything inside me churning: bewilderment, anxiety, irritation, almost fear, because I had no idea where Emma could have gotten the money for something like that. It made no sense. I kept coming back to the same thought, playing it over and over in my head like an old record that refused to stop. My parents were always broke, they lived paycheck to paycheck. From one plea for help to the next, Emma didn't have a job, she was already in her 4th year of college, and, as far as I knew, she was barely making ends meet, paying for it with loans and the little money her mom and dad occasionally sent her. So where did she get the money for a 2-day party at? One of the most expensive country clubs in the state? It just didn't add up in any possible reality. But what burned even more than the question where was why wasn't I invited? I'm her sister, we might not have been close, we might have argued, quarreled, irritated each other, but to completely erase me, like that, as if I didn't exist, that was already cruel. I couldn't just sit there in this uncertainty. I picked up the phone and dialed her number. 1, 2, 3 rings. And then an irritated, "What do you want, Leslie?" Her voice was so tired and coldly hostile, as if I wasn't her sister, but some stranger she was obliged to answer out of politeness. "Hi, Emma," I began, trying to speak calmly. "Jessica just told me about your graduation, why didn't I know anything about it? Why wasn't I invited?" There was a moment of silence, and then came the flat, "I see. Because you weren't invited." No explanation, no hesitation, no trace of regret, just short, dry, like a blow. I was speechless. "Sorry, what?" I choked out. "You heard me," she continued, "you weren't invited to my party," and she said the word "my" with such emphasis, as if she wanted to emphasize that I had nothing to do with this life, this celebration, this circle of people. I felt something inside me crumble. "Emma, why? Why don't you invite your own sister to the prom?" I asked, no longer with the voice of a sensible adult woman, but almost like a child whose dearest thing is being taken away. "Because I don't want you there," she snapped. "I never wanted you around, Leslie. I'm tired of your condescending attitude, your advice, your always correct phrases. This is my day, and I don't want you to ruin it." I tried to object. "I'm not trying to lecture you or prove anything to you, Emma. I just wanted," but she interrupted. "Nonsense," she spat, almost contemptuously. "Every time we're in the same room, you brag about your work, your money, your success. Do you think I don't see the way you look at us? As if you're better, you can't just be around without turning everything into a lecture." Her words hurt more than I expected. I opened my mouth to say it wasn't true, but I didn't have the chance. "And don't even think about coming," she said, and for the first time, a hint of steel crept into her voice. "I already told the club's security not to let you in, so don't embarrass yourself, don't even try." Then, a short beep, she simply hung up. I remained sitting, holding the phone in my hand, and felt the air become thick, as if the world had stopped. Of course, I knew Emma and I had never had an easy relationship, but what I had just heard, it was beyond that. This wasn't just coldness, not teenage resentment, this was hatred, real, hard one, almost relishing its own power. I sat for a long time, motionless, and the longer I remained silent, the louder another question rang in my head: where did she get the money? All of this, the club, the dinner, the 2-day celebration, had probably cost as much as I paid for their car, and then everything inside me turned over. The next evening, barely finished work, I went to my parents' house, not to make a scene, not to argue, but to finally clear everything up. I wanted to talk to them calmly, like an adult daughter who simply wants to understand what's going on in her family, which felt like someone had dropped a bomb on her. When I pulled up to their house, the first thing I noticed was the empty driveway, where their new car usually sat. Now only oil stains were visible, like traces of someone's absence. My heart lurched unpleasantly. I got out of the car, slowly walked up the steps, and knocked on the door. The door, as always, was unlocked. Mom, Dad, and Emma were sitting in the living room. They looked odd. Dad was holding a mug but not drinking. Mom, nervously adjusting the hem of her robe, avoided my gaze. Emma, as soon as she saw me, rolled her eyes, as if my appearance were the greatest drama. "What are you doing here?" she asked, irritation in her voice. "Nobody invited you." Emma, stop, Dad said, but his voice sounded so tired that I realized he'd long since lost the energy for any kind of showdown. I looked around, something in the air was off, as if everyone was waiting for something they didn't want to say out loud. Mom sat with her eyes down on her knees, and Dad averted his gaze, as if afraid to meet my gaze. I took a step forward and asked the first question that came to mind, "Where's your car?" A deathly silence fell, even the ticking of the wall clock, which usually irritated me with its insistent rhythm, now seemed frozen along with us all, and the air in the room became thick as syrup. I looked at them, the three people closest to me, who in one moment seemed completely alien. "Mom, Dad, where's the car I bought you?" I asked, feeling a growing sense of incomprehension, anxiety, and some icy fear that I might not like the answer growing in my chest with each word. Mom looked up, and I saw her fingers tremble as she absent-mindedly tugged at the hem of her sweater. "We sold it," she said quietly, almost in a whisper, as if hoping that if she said it softly enough, the meaning would lose its force. At that moment, my head spun, as if everything around me, the walls, the furniture, even the faces, began to spin, turning into some kind of vortex of absurdity. "Are you crazy?" I blurted out. "I just bought you that car a month ago." Mom was silent, and Dad, without looking up, muttered under his breath, "Emma needed the money for her graduation, it was the only way to help her." For a second, I couldn't believe my ears. Then I turned to Emma. She was sitting with her legs crossed, with that smug expression I'd hated since childhood, when she felt she'd gotten her way. "So that's how it is," I said slowly, trying not to shout. "You sold the car I bought you to pay for a party I wasn't even invited to?" Mom immediately tried to justify herself. "Technically, the car was registered in my name, so I had every right to sell it." She said this with forced calm, but I saw her voice waver on the last word. Emma chuckled, leaning back in her chair, and said with defiant calm, "I told them I wanted a great prom. They just did what loving parents do, they found a way." "With my money?" I exploded, no longer able to contain the rage seething inside me. "It stopped being your money the moment you gave it to them," Emma retorted, crossing her arms and looking at me with the condescending confidence of a lawyer who had just won her case. "The car legally belonged to Mom, so she could do whatever she wanted with it." I glanced from one to the other. Mom was fiddling with her handkerchief, looking at the floor, as if trying to wipe away the shame along with the dust on the carpet. Dad sat slightly hunched over, as if under an invisible weight, and, without raising his head, pretended to study his palms. And Emma sat there like a prom queen, as if she'd just won the lottery, oblivious or unwilling to notice how what had once been a family was crumbling. "So you sold your $30,000 car to pay for your spoiled daughter's party, and you didn't even have the decency to invite me?" I said slowly, feeling my voice breaking. "Leslie, please don't be like that," Mom interjected, her voice soft, almost pleading. "It's Emma's graduation, it's important." "More important than having reliable transportation? More important than respecting the daughter who helped you when no one else would?" I stepped closer, but neither of them looked up. "I bought this car so you could drive safely, so you wouldn't have to worry. I did it with love, and you sold it for fireworks and champagne?" A heavy, almost tangible silence hung between us. No one answered, no one attempted to explain. Emma merely leaned back slightly, a shadow of a satisfied smirk crossing her face, the same one that had made me want to scream as a child. "You know what?" I finally said, feeling all the anger congeal into a single point inside me, turning cold. "You got exactly what you wanted, congratulations." I turned and headed for the door. Behind me, no one said a word, no one called out, no one tried to stop me. Even my mother, who always cried when I was upset, remained seated this time, her head bowed. I walked out, got into my car, and simply sat in the driveway for a few minutes, looking at the windows of my parents' house. Everything was seething in my chest: resentment, pain, disappointment, but above all that, a strange, quiet feeling that this might be the end. I tried to make sense of what had happened, trying to understand the moment it all went wrong, when my own parents decided that one daughter's happiness could be bought by betraying another. At home, I poured myself a large glass of wine, without even changing, simply sank onto the sofa, turned on some soft music, and gave myself permission to be quiet, a silence in which I didn't have to justify myself, care, save, or prove myself. 3 days later, I opened Emma's Instagram. It was impossible to miss. It was bursting with the joy of celebration, hundreds of photos, sparkling garlands, snow-white tablecloths, dishes that probably cost more than my weekly salary, fireworks, an orchestra, and she, in a designer dress, dazzling, happy, with a glass of champagne in her hand, all of this, paid for with the money I'd earned from selling the car I'd bought for my parents. I closed the screen, and suddenly realized that for the first time in a long time, I didn't feel like crying or screaming. I simply felt a sense of emptiness, a strange relief. I was done, completely. A month passed, not a call, not a message, not a like on Facebook. It was as if I'd been erased from their lives, and you know what? I was actually okay with that. I slept better than I had in years, not waking up in the middle of the night from yet another phone call, one of them asking for help, advice, or money. This time I was free, and for the first time in a long time, the word didn't ring alone. The phone rang early one morning, just as I was pouring myself my first cup of coffee. The name Mom appeared on the screen, and my stomach tightened. I literally felt a heaviness rising in my chest, as if someone had placed a stone there. My first instinct was not to answer, just let the call fade into the void, as I had done before, when I couldn't bear to listen to her complaints, excuses, and hints about how I'd forgotten about my family. But, as often happens, curiosity overcame my instinct for self-preservation. I pressed accept. "Hi, Leslie," Mom said in that falsely cheerful voice I'd known since childhood, the voice she used when she needed something, as if she could conceal manipulation behind a veneer of kindness. "How are you, honey?" she asked, drawing out each word. I took a deep breath. "I'm fine, Mom, what do you want?" I asked, already sensing the conversation heading down a predictable ledge. "Well, you know, my birthday is next week, and I was thinking," she began. I didn't let her finish. "Let me guess, you need money for something." A pause, then, in the same even tone, as if everything was perfectly natural. "Actually, I was hoping you'd buy me a new car for my birthday." I couldn't help but burst out laughing, a real, genuine laugh, not from amusement, but from shock, from the absurdity of what I was hearing. "Are you seriously asking me that now, Leslie?" Language, she cut me off in a schoolteacher's tone. "And yes, I'm serious, we really do need a car. It's really hard without one. Your dad has so many doctor's appointments that I can barely make it to work." I was silent for a second, trying to believe this was all real and not some cruel joke. Then, calmly, but with a chill in her voice, "Mom, you had a car, a new, reliable car that I bought you a month ago. You sold my gift to pay for a party I wasn't even invited to, and now you're calling and asking for another one?" "Leslie, please," she drawled, softer now, with a hint of feigned pity. "We're going through hard times, you make a good living, and we're your parents. Families are supposed to help each other." I almost choked with anger. "Help each other? Are you serious? When was the last time you helped me, Mom? When did any of you ever do anything for me besides endlessly beg for money?" There was a pause on the other end. I could almost hear her lips pressed together. Then, briefly, with resentment, "It's not fair, Leslie, we love you." "No," I said, "you like my salary, it makes a difference." There was silence, then I heard a soft sigh, a stifled sob. She'd changed her tack. "Of course, always the same, tears that were supposed to make me feel guilty. Please, baby," she whispered, "I'm 58 next week. All I want for my birthday is to have reliable transportation again. Is that too much to ask of my successful daughter?" I closed my eyes, trying not to explode. "Yes, Mom, it's too much, especially after what you did." "We had no choice," she replied stubbornly. "Emma's graduation was important, it was a special day." "More important than honesty? More important than respect for your daughter, who gave you $30,000 just to make your life easier?" My voice trembled, but no longer from pain, but from exhaustion. "Leslie," she said suddenly, completely calm, "I expect a car from you for my birthday. That's what I want and what I'm asking for," and she hung up. I remained seated, holding the phone in my hand as if it had turned to ice. For a few seconds, I simply stared at the screen, then quietly exhaled. She didn't even try to feign regret. No regrets, no confessions, just anticipation, as if it were normal for their daughter to pull out her wallet again and solve all their problems. But this time I felt something change inside. Instead of the usual pain or guilt, a cold, strangely sweet determination took hold. I smiled, for the first time, not sadly, but with something akin to excitement. An idea formed in my head, petty, vindictive, absolutely perfect. I walked to the table, turned on the laptop, and opened the photo folder. Among them were the very same pictures I took that day when I handed them the car keys. Mom was crying, Dad stood next to me, proud, Emma was taking pictures as if they were her gift. I chose the best photo of the two of them standing by the car, beaming and happy, unaware that in a couple of months they would sell it for champagne and ribbons. I printed the photo on thick glossy paper and carefully placed it in a small gift box, adding a note. Here's the car you asked for. It's all you deserve for proving yourself an ungrateful and manipulative woman. Don't ever ask me for money again. When her birthday arrived, I wrote a short message. Happy birthday, Mommy. I'm not coming to the party tonight. The reply was quick. I guess it's for the best. Emma doesn't want to see you anyway, but I'm still waiting for my gift. She added a car emoji at the end. I looked at that tiny symbol and felt a quiet, icy laugh welling up inside me. I called the courier service and had my gift box delivered right to their door. An hour later, I received a delivered notification. I leaned back in my chair, grabbed a cup of coffee, and simply waited. It didn't take long. Half an hour later, my phone started ringing nonstop, first Mom, then Dad, then Emma, then Mom again. I sat there, gritting my teeth, watching their names flash across the screen, and that was it. My heart was pounding. But I knew I wouldn't answer the first wave of calls. Only after the 10th call from Mom did I finally decide to pick up. You're a terrible girl, she screamed, her voice shaking. As if she couldn't understand the source of her fury. How could you do this to me? What should I do? Mom, I said calmly, almost icily, I gave you exactly what you asked for, a car for your birthday, that damn picture. Yes, that one. I heard her gasp. It's a picture of the car I bought you. And you sold it to pay for your precious daughter's party. I opened the box in front of everyone, in front of all my friends. They saw the picture and your nasty note. It was as if a storm had exploded inside me, but I continued, you humiliated me, Mom. Okay, now you know how I felt when you sold my gift without even telling me. That was different. No, it wasn't. You took what I gave you out of love and threw it away for Emma, so now you see the picture of what you had and what you lost. It seems fair to me. There was silence on the other side, and then a strangled whisper, you're terrible. I couldn't help but smile, cold and quiet. You're a terrible daughter, and you're a terrible mother. We're even, and I hung up. The calls and messages started pouring in immediately. Dad called me selfish and heartless. Trying to get through to my conscience, Emma sent long messages filled with hurtful words, calling me a pathetic loser who would die alone. Mom alternated between begging me to buy her a real car and cursing me for embarrassing her. I blocked their numbers one after another, leaving them no chance for a single call or message. The next few weeks were a test of endurance. They would come to my apartment, but I wouldn't answer the door. They would come to my office, but I would ask security to throw them out. They tried every possible way to regain control, but it was all in vain. Eventually, they stopped trying. 6 months had passed since I completely cut off contact with them. From my cousin Jessica, I learned that Emma still lived with Mom and Dad, couldn't find a decent job, and that her communications degree opened far fewer doors for her than she expected. Mom continued to tell everyone that I abandoned the family, that I was cruel and heartless, that I didn't help financially, and even tried to ask other relatives for money. But I didn't care anymore. I had my own life. I was dating a new guy I'd met at a corporate conference. He had his own successful career, and he didn't expect me to pay for his family's living expenses. I was going on vacations I couldn't afford before because I was always giving money to my parents. I was saving for a house, building my future, not saving someone else's. Sometimes I wondered if I'd been too harsh with the photo, but then I remembered Emma's smug face when she said the car wasn't mine anymore. I remembered my mom casually saying they'd sold it, like it was no big deal. I remembered not being allowed to go to my sister's graduation, even though I'd paid for her college education for 4 years. No, I'm not sorry. They made their choice, and I made mine. I realized that sometimes the best thing you can do for yourself is to walk away from people who only see you as a source of resources, even if it's your family. Emma wanted me out of her life. She got what she dreamed of. Mom wanted a car for her birthday. She got one, but not the one she expected, and I found freedom. I regained my self-respect. I got a life where I wasn't manipulated, used, or pressured with constant requests. And in that moment, I realized, the best deal I've ever made is the one I made myself, with my dignity, with the world I'm building, and no one, not even those I called family, can take that away from me anymore.